Hi everyone, I'm Sandy and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my May reading wrap up for you. A little bit, later than what I would normally do, but it's been a busy couple of weeks. And so yeah, but I'm here today, yay! And May is actually really interesting because May is the first month in the last year that I've been recording my TBR videos that I almost finished my TBR. And I say almost because I missed it by 2 days, the last book. That has never happened to me. Now, normally sometimes I have, 12 to 15 books on my TBR, which is a lot. This month I didn't have 12 to 15. I just had a number I can't remember right now, but it's a couple of very big books. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the books that were on my TBR in the order that I read them. Most of these I've already talked about. There's only 2 that I haven't. So the ones I've already talked about, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I'm just going to give you a brief idea of what I thought about them and move on. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. They're all here in here. I'm still trying to figure out my angles, y'all. Y'all, I've been talking to Shelly Swearingen too much. She says y'all a lot. All right. The first book, let's get to it. The first book is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And so this particular book I started in April and finished in May. And it is, a chunker of a book for sure. I actually really liked Moby Dick. If you take out all the whale chapters, I thought it was really fascinating. I love the character of Queequeg and of Ishmael and of and Captain Ahab. Really, really fascinating story. So yeah, I really did like this one, but I did start it in April and finish it in May. So it wasn't really on my May TBR. It was actually on my April, but I finished it. All right. The next one wasn't on my TBR because it was for the BookTube prize, and that is The Doctors Blackwell by Janice P Nimura. This ended up in my number 4 spot. I did like it quite a bit, but it didn't really stack up to the other 3 that I had in the BookTube prize nonfiction group C from the last round. So this one is about the first woman who got an MD in the United States, and her sister, they opened a women's hospital where women could come and train and learn how to be doctors. Really interesting and fascinating, interesting and fascinating book about 2 incredible women that you don't really hear a lot about. You hear a lot about like Florence Nightingale, but not about the Doctors Blackwell. But that was the second book, but it wasn't really on my TBR. All right, so in May, there was a wonderful event called the Asian Readathon, which is hosted by With Cindy. This is my 2nd year participating in it, and I was actually able to read a book off of all of the prompts, which was wonderful. And the first book was one that I picked specifically because of the Asian Readathon, and that is Wild Swans by Chang. So this was my 1001 book club pick for May, and this book follows 3 generations of women in China: the grandmother, mother, and the daughter. And the daughter is the author of this book. I really enjoyed the first half of this book, I would say, and then the last half lost me a bit. It was an interesting, I really appreciated the grandmother story and how just traumatic her story was. There was so much that she went through, including feet binding, and just that description of that was just, scary. But it was an interesting, it was a really good kind of, the first 2 were the 2 that I loved. The last one got a little bit slow and kind of took the book down a little bit in my opinion. It could have been quite a bit shorter. She could have cut out a lot, but of course, with it being her history, she had way more information to impart about her timeline. So, but that was the first book that was on my official TBR that I finished. And then the next book was a buddy read with Kristen from Enter the Book, and it was Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. This isn't a book for the Asian Readathon. It was just one we picked up. I think I saw it on one of her TBRs and said, hey, I have that book. Do you want to read it? So yeah, that was our first buddy read together. It was a lot of fun reading with Kristen, but this book was, I wanted it to be a different book is what I would say, but it was a really interesting one. But again, I've already talked about it. Okay, so the next book I've already talked about was for the Asian Readathon for the prompt of a book that someone recommended to you or came highly rated, and that was Funny in Farsi by Firoozeh Dumas, and this was recommended to me by Book Talks at Mrs. Thomas. And if you're not aware, my lovely husband is actually from Iran and speaks Farsi. And this book is all about Firoozeh's experience immigrating to the United States and her experience learning to speak English, her family members, all of that in here. And so it really rang true in a lot of cases for me, and with family members that we have. And yeah, it was really funny at parts. The beginning of it was way funnier than kind of towards the middle and end, but funny in Farsi. And so one thing, the author, when I talked about the book last time, the author had said that the language is called Persian, and she put funny in Farsi in the title. My husband and a commenter both disagreed and said no, it's called Farsi. And my husband said native language speakers call it Farsi. So there you go. So thank you to the commenter who pointed that out. All right. The next one I did as a buddy read with Courtney Ferreter, and it's one of my 1001 books, and it was Call It Sleep by Henry Roth. I just talked about this one last week, so I'm not going to go into any real detail on this particular one, but it was good to get Call It Sleep off my list, and it was on my official TBR for May. Do you see how well I did? I'm so proud of myself. It's amazing. And then the last one I did as a buddy read that I haven't talked about, the last one is 1Q84, and I did this as a buddy read with Fraser Simon from Springboard Thought. And Fraser has a wonderful 20+ minute video discussing all the reasons why this is a horrible book. And so I didn't hate it as much, but I didn't love it. I put it more in the 2.5 kind of range. I think Fraser gave it a 1 and would give it a 0 probably if possible. Lots of boobs everywhere. Let's talk more about boobs and sex and boobs some more. And then, yeah, it's just weird. If you want to start Murakami, maybe pick a different one, but this one I just recently talked about, so I'm not going to talk about it again. Okay, so those are all the books I've already talked about that are on my TBR. I only had 3 other books that were officially on my May TBR. And so the first one was for the Asian readathon, and it was for a world that you want to, that is different than your own, or you want to experience. I don't want to experience this world, but it was an interesting book. So it's Our Violet Ends by Chloe Gong. So this is the second book in a duology, this being the first one, These Violet Delights. I'm telling you, whoever designed these book covers, so incredible, absolutely beautiful. These Violet Delights and Our Violet Ends duology is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. And so I read the first one last year in September. I read the play Romeo and Juliet, and then I read These Violet Delights. And then this one was published in the last 6 months. So the duology, as far as it being a Romeo and Juliet retelling, it is in that there's a Montague and a Kai family. There's a Juliet and a Roma who have a complicated history. There are characters with similar names, and their families are warring, just like the Romeo and Juliet story, very warring families. It is set in 1920s Shanghai, though, so it's very different from a location perspective, and that's really where the similarities end. Fighting families, warring families. There are some things in here about people telling someone that they were killed when they weren't killed, and things like that parallel Romeo and Juliet. But outside of that, just think of it as a young adult, fantasy-ish, angsty, romancy kind of novel. But having said that, it was fun. I mean, it was a nice break from Moby Dick and 1Q84, and it was just this it was just this easy read to make it through. But it is not very similar to Romeo and Juliet. So the first book kind of ended in a little bit of a cliffhanger, and it took about a chapter for it to catch up in this book as far as what happened. And I can't talk about too much of it because if you are going to read it, it would be a pretty big spoiler. Just know it's fun. It's not going to be super complicated as far as, it's not going to be Romeo and Juliet, and it doesn't have that kind of language in it. I would never want to visit this world because, yeah, it was very dark at places and very violent. Lots of violence in this particular book. But again, how incredibly beautiful these books are. I'm telling you, whoever designed this, kudos to you, because this is absolutely gorgeous. those could have been in qualified for one of the prompts for the Asian Readathon, which is a book that makes you all googly-eyed or a really pretty cover. But the one that I had selected for this is one that I did as a buddy read with Britta Bowler, and that is The Memoirs of Lady Hyegyong. And this was translated by Habush, I believe is how you say the last name. This is, Britta and I read The Red Queen by Margaret Drabble a couple of months ago, I don't remember when we read it. We read it sometime and then realized that there was an actual memoir and decided to read this together. So it was really good to be able to read the actual memoirs after having read The Red Queen, because there are a lot of things that that author, that Margaret Drabble, pulled from this into The Red Queen. Having said that, that's really the only similarities. It's the Red Queen, or the princess, that was in this. She never actually became queen. So this is her own writing, and it's actually 4 separate memoirs told at different points in time, but they cover similar time periods. So in one, you might get more about the background of the castle, and then you might get more about her husband, Prince Sado, who had something, who was very cruel, very yeah, there was a lot he did that was very bad. He also had I think it was a fabric kind of thing where he didn't like fabric on his skin, stuff like that. But it goes through and documents kind of 4 different points in her life. And so you don't get the Prince Sado part until the very final one, which was 1805. Now, Britta and I had differing opinions on which memoir we liked the best, or which memoir was the most effective. I liked the last one because it was in chronological order and it was Prince Sado, and I got everything I wanted to know about that time period. I think a couple of the earlier ones were some of Britta's, Britta liked a little bit more. But this book was the googly-eyed cover one that I did pick for that prompt because it's so pretty again. But yeah, it was I'm really, really happy that I read it. And I would have never picked this up without Britta. And so thank you so much, Britta, for reading it with me. I look forward to our next buddy read, of course. And I know it's a much shorter book than this one too, so that's exciting. But this was on my TBR and I did finish it. So the last book I have is the only one on my TBR that I didn't finish in May. I did finish it in June, and I've actually already talked about it, but the book that I came so close, I just couldn't read the last 2 days just because of some stuff going on with my family. And so yeah. And the book was An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. I did talk about this one also last weekend, but this one, I finished it in June. I came so close to finishing my TBR. Like I said, it's never happened before. I've never been able to do that. Now, granted, in other months, I might have picked up something not on my TBR. I did not do that this month. I only read for my TBR. I don't know why that was as well, other than I did have multiple buddy reads and I just had a number of books I wanted to get through. So it was a very interesting reading month, very diverse. I had a couple nonfictions, I had a contemporary novel, I had a classic, I had one Q84, which I don't know what you call that. So wide mix of books and genres, and yeah, it was really amazing. I love a reading month like that where I just have a wide variety. I think those are the most successful reading months for me. And it's not about the number of books. It has nothing to do with that. If I had read 3 books, I would have been fine with that as well. It was about what I was reading and the mix of books that I was reading that made me feel just so accomplished in May, because I just love that big mix. And plus I did get a major classic off the list, which was Moby Dick, and a monster of 1Q84. So I'm pretty happy with that, with my reading in May. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? I know a couple of people, or at least one person, that's starting these Violent Delights in June. So yeah, just curious what you think of it. Leave me a comment down below. I would love to hear from you, of course. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, everyone, thanks. Bye.